pastor friend in Brazil who has said, never forget that the husband is the head of the household. And don't ever forget that the wife is the neck, and where she turns, the head has to follow. We might call that some sound advice, sage wisdom from someone who has spent years happily married to his wife. And so I'll give you 7 phrases that I think we can call the 7 phrases we need for a happy, successful, productive, God-honoring life. And we're going to take one of those, at least this week. The more I've sort of tried to process this may become a future sermon series. But today we're going to take one of those, the one I think we have the most trouble with. We're going to look at what it means for us as God's people. So the 7 phrases. The first one is, I love you. Second one, if you want to have a successful, happy life, is I'm sorry. The third one is excuse me. The fourth one is please. Fifth is thank you. Sixth is you're welcome. And the 7th phrase is please forgive me. Now, those are the 7 phrases I think we need for a happy life. It's the basic manners that we were taught as children. Right? And these are phrases you've heard before. It's nothing revolutionary. We've known these phrases, and at some point in time, we've probably actually used all of them. And for the most part, I don't think we mind needing to use them. Right? It's easy enough if a friend comes over and does something nice for you to say thank you. And it's a simple act that shows that we are grateful for the way in which they have blessed us. It's not hard to do that. If someone is nice to you, it's pretty easy to be nice to them back. When you accidentally run into someone at the grocery store, apologizing is easy. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see your foot there. Telling your spouse or your children or your significant other or your parents or a sibling, I love you. That's a simple task that I hope we do every day. If you go to bed not telling someone that you haven't loved them, I think you've missed an opportunity to express something to them about the way you feel and about the way God feels. And most of these phrases, it's easy to get a response back. And I love you is almost always followed by an I love you too. Unless you're a stalker, that's kind of how it works, right? A thank you is almost always followed by a you're welcome. In most instances, we know how to respond to each of these phrases. I love you. I'm sorry, excuse me, please, thank you, you're welcome. Except this last one. Please forgive me. Because the idea of forgiveness, the idea of someone coming to us and saying that the act, the thing that you did that hurt me, that the offense that you committed, I'm not going to count it against you. That's the one thing we really can't control. We generally tend to fall in love with someone that loves us back. It's what makes the great relationships work. There's something about the two-way nature of love that's easy for us to understand. But when it comes to forgiveness, it is completely out of our hands. I can't force you to forgive me if I do something wrong. Maybe they forgive us quickly. It was a minor offense. I asked you to pick up your shoes to clean up the living room, and you didn't. You did now a day later, but you're forgiven. But maybe they don't. Maybe that grudge sits there and it's harbored for a while. The sad part about it is there's nothing you can do about it. See, at least I've sort of become aware of this as we begin parenting. That one of the things that we have to teach our children is that sometimes you have to do something even if you don't want to. Like apologizing. And this is a phrase that we use constantly. You need to go apologize. So we have kids over, we have the children's friends over, we go somewhere and play, and we encourage them to apologize and to reconcile the relationship. You hurt this person. You pushed them, you accidentally tripped them, you ran ran into them with your bike. Something happened where this person is hurt and crying. You need to apologize. And the number one thing that Elise and I hear when we say you need to apologize is, but I didn't do it on purpose. As if our intention is all that matters. No, instead we have to reassure our children and some adults that whether or not you meant to hurt somebody, you did, and that means an apology is warranted. You may not feel like you need to apologize, but our goal should always be that if we offend someone, we do the hard work of seeking the reconciliation. Whether it was intentional or not, we need to act repentant and go and restore the relationship. More than intention. Did you mean to hurt somebody? Is the result. Somebody was hurt. Someone was hurt by your actions, so an apology is automatically warranted. But that's the scary thing about apologizing, because the receiving of forgiveness is not a guarantee. So a kid runs into another kid on their bike and you can say, I'm sorry. That doesn't mean the other kid can immediately say, I forgive you. And I love you is followed by, and I love you too. Apologizing isn't always followed by forgiveness. But it becomes our first step towards reflecting and honoring God that we seek to make amends. And we had this Matthew 18 passage read for us earlier. I think that's the same sort of thing that Peter struggled with. Listen to his question that he poses to Jesus, perhaps prompted out of fear, maybe pain, rejection, hurt. Lord, how many times shall I forgive someone who sins against me? Up to 7? Peter basically says, look, Jesus, someone keeps hurting me and then asking for forgiveness. There's got to be an end to it, right? I don't always have to keep extending it. Peter essentially wanted to know the boundaries, and I think that's a fair question because we often want to know the boundaries too. Who's in, who's out, and how can we tell? Can we exclude someone from our family, from our friendship, from our faith circle because their chances or their merit for forgiveness have run out? Sorry, I forgave you 7 times. The 8th time I'm off the hook. You are not forgiven. Even unintentional pain begins to wear our souls thin, and we struggle to continually forgive someone who keeps hurting us by their actions. Maybe it's by their lifestyle. They don't know that they're hurting us, but they are, and to continually seek fostering a relationship with them becomes a chore. It's not just this intentional or malicious sin that hurts us, but the daily grind of someone's choices that pain us. One pastor referred to it as a death by paper cuts. It's the small things that ebb away that if we don't keep in check can begin to bitter and poison our soul. And Jesus responds to Peter's question, Lord, how many times should I forgive someone who sins against me? Jesus' response is classic Jesus. Because he breaks down the barriers that Peter and us, all of us, we all try to build. I tell you, not 7 times, Jesus says, but 77 times. And Jesus is doing something subtle about the depth and extravagance of God's love and forgiveness that I think we need to stop and realize. The book of Genesis, the first book in the Bible, is the telling of, in its most simplest form, we might say an act of humanity when it's left to its own devices. At least those are the takeaway from the first few stories. Without God's intervention, without a characteristic of a godly lifestyle, what we quickly see in Genesis is that people left by themselves do a lot of terrible things. One sin quickly becomes multiplied. And by chapter 4, we're facing death and murder. One brother killing another. The story that God pronounced as good, as blessed, as sacred, as holy in Genesis 1, by Genesis 4 is a complete mess. So we get the story of Cain and Abel. And after Cain kills Abel, he is a man outcast from his own society. He's forced to wander the roads and the streets and the cities aimlessly. Dismayed and afraid for his life, and I think rightfully so, because the pronouncement from God is, you're going to be a cursed man. You're not going to have the same production and life and vitality that you've known because of this sin. He's dismayed and says, God, what's the point in living then? People are just going to come after me and want to do something bad back to me, and yet God puts this hedge of protection around him and says no, because any act of violence committed against you will become sevenfold back on them. And it was ultimately God's way to try and stop the violence. Because violence never solves anything. God says early on, even when humanity is at its worst, violence doesn't solve anything, but love does. And so does forgiveness. So God pronounced that Cain would be safe from retaliation. No one will do anything bad back to you. Because if they do, they're going to get it back 7 times worse. And yet, just a few verses later, we see humanity trying to corrupt that again. They try to own that for themselves. There was a man named Lamech who goes to his wife and says, somebody injured me. Right? We were working. We were building this new downtown building, and someone accidentally hit me with a hammer. So I killed him. But if anybody tries to get me back, they're going to experience it 77 times worse. The violence quickly escalated. An accidental injury turns into murder. Violence led to more violence, like it always does. Exactly the opposite of what God wanted. And Lamech says, if Cain is avenged 7 times, I shall be 77 times. If Cain's protection from escalating violence was 7-fold, Lamech wanted to go even further, 77 times. One act of violence becomes 7, becomes 77. We see the snowball beginning to take form, the exact opposite of what God had in mind. Whenever we do something wrong to somebody else, their immediate response is to get us back. And our idea of fair or just when we are getting someone back is always worse, let's be honest. It's always worse than what they did to us. Right? We think, well, they did something bad to me, so I'm going to do the same thing bad back to them. But our idea of what was just as bad is always worse because of the emotional pain that we carry with it. So they accidentally step on our foot and we purposefully punch them in the face. Right? That's the sort of analogy we make as what's fair. And we see Lamech taking it to an extreme. Just try and get me back, and it'll happen 77 times worse to you. Lord, how many times shall I forgive someone who sins against me? Up to 7? It's a biblical question, right? 7 is the perfect number. It's God's number. It's a holy number. So 7 times has to be more than fair. I've given you 7 opportunities. That's the perfect amount of chances to get your act together. Fool me once, Peter might say. Shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Fool me more than 7 times, and good luck in hell, because I'm not forgiving you. That's the stance that Peter takes, up to 7 times, and then after that, there's no more forgiveness. And then Jesus takes this question from Peter. How many times shall I forgive someone who sins against me? And he turns it on its head. Because for Jesus, it's not about boundaries. It's not about merits. It's not about acceptable or reasonable limits. For Jesus, it's always about radical, abundant, and unending grace. See, Jesus' peace is not just meant to extend in limited quantities. Here's your little bit of peace, and you can have a tiny bit, and why don't you take some, but nobody ever get too much because there's not enough to go around. If we think of peace in that sense, like, can I just have a little bit? Jesus would give us the same sort of critique. That's not how we approach the aspect of peace. Peace, understanding it biblically, is something that is meant to extend in all things and at all times. So you don't just get a little bit, you get more peace than you need. Forgiveness works the same sort of way. It can't run out. So keep extending it and you'll keep discovering that you have more to give. Sort of like trying to empty the ocean with an eyedropper. You'll soon discover that though you've removed a fair amount, there always seems to be more. Every act of forgiveness, every extension of God's mercy, every time we try to restore a relationship, reveals something deep and vast about the extent of God's grace and forgiveness to us. And to prove it, Jesus is going to tell us a story, the parable of the two debtors. And it goes something like this. There once was a certain king that wanted to settle some outstanding debts. So he called in one gentleman who had somehow managed to accumulate 20 years' worth of debt. Paycheck after paycheck for 20 solid and unending years worth of debt. And the king, well, he somehow says it's forgiven. And we sort of think, it's a good story. The median, the average U.S. household income is $51,000. And if you take everybody together and find the middle point of salary, it's $51,000. Over 20 years, we're going to assume this is the average working man, over 20 years, that meant the man amassed a debt of just over $1 million. And the king says, it's forgiven. $1 million on the spot of debt, wiped out in an instant. The servant, ecstatic, no doubt, left the royal court leaping for joy. $1 million has been forgiven. Almost as good as winning the lottery, right? Maybe it's better. And on his way home to give his wife and children the good news, he ran into a man that owed him $13,000. No small amount, for sure, and $13,000 is still a sizable debt. But compared to the $1 million that he had just been forgiven, it's pennies. The second servant was also unable to pay. He was thrown into jail to work out his debt. It's sort of like coming up short at a restaurant and saying, can I wash the dishes to pay off the rest of my debt? Except this man had to wash $13,000 worth of dishes. Well, of course, the king found out, and he was more than unhappy. More than that, he was upset. He called in the man who had the $1 million debt, who had been forgiven, and demanded an explanation. You wicked servant, you're an evil person. I canceled all of the debt because you begged me to. So shouldn't you have had mercy just like I gave it to you? If I'm willing and capable to forgive you of over $1 million, can't you forgive $13,000? Can't you pass that goodness on? And off to jail that first servant went. Now he has $1 million worth of dishes to wash. And I don't know what the going rate for dishes is, but he's going to be there a while. And ultimately, we have to say that this is an example of the extravagant forgiveness that God gives us. You see, the answer to Peter's question is, don't forgive them once. Don't forgive them seven times. And ultimately, don't even forgive them 77 times. The real answer, Jesus says, is to forgive up to 1 million. Or really, we might just want to say, as many times as necessary. Because that is, after all, the parable of what the kingdom of heaven is like, so that is what Christ has done for us. The question that Peter asks, that I think we all ask, or at least want to ask if we have the guts, is somehow related to the question of enough. We all want to know, God, when is enough enough? And Jesus answers essentially, never. There is no end, there is no bottom, there is no limit to the amount of grace that God has given you. We experience continually renewing, unending grace on a day-by-day basis. No end to His forgiveness, no end to His love. And so we as good servants, because we don't want to be like the wicked one, right? Well, we should go ahead and live the same way. We should extend forgiveness as often as is necessary for someone to experience true repentance and reconciliation in Christ. And you all know how difficult that is, because every single one of you is trying to justify or defend yourself or your beliefs or your ideas about forgiveness. Because you're probably saying, yes, but you don't know what they did. You don't know how bad it hurt. And that was no accident. True, all of those statements are probably true. And I've experienced all of those before. But Jesus concludes the parable by saying, this is how my heavenly Father will treat you unless you forgive a brother or sister from your heart. And yet there's still something within us that wants to fight back. So you just want me to forgive and forget, right? It's not that easy to do. No, it's not. And I'm not asking you to forgive and forget. Forgiveness is not about forgetfulness. It is about grace. It is about not forcing someone to work harder to experience your good graces again. Because let's be honest, they can't work long enough or hard enough or do enough good deeds that you could just forget the act that they did to you. So it's not about forgetfulness. We'd always find something to continue piling on the debt that they owe us. This was the initial hurt, but then you did this, and that's sort of like interest. So I'm just going to keep piling up how much you owe me. And you need to keep doing good things for me. And if you ever mess up, I'm going to add to your debt. And pretty soon everybody's in debt to everybody and we don't get anywhere. If we demanded that people work off their debt to us, like the two men in the story, we'd all be in fake, artificial relationships, sucking up to everybody around us. And we'd never experience the real and transformative love and support and community and ultimately life with God. Forgiveness is not about forgetfulness. The truth is, you may need to forgive that person 1,000,000 times. You may even need to forgive them 1,000,000 times today. Because forgiveness is ultimately about releasing what you feel owed because of the wrong that they did. You may not know why they hurt you, but you can choose to forgive anyway. You can choose to say, it would, quite frankly, be impossible for you to pay back the debt that you owe me. There's just no way you can do it. The pain and the hurt that your actions have caused my life, the honest assessment is you can't pay me enough. In money, in friendship, in kindness, in cars, in trips, in enjoyable experiences. There's no way for you to undo the hurt that you have caused. So there is no possible way for you to work out the debt that you owe. You owe me over $1,000,000. And I choose to release it anyway. Forgiveness does not mean forgetting. And it also doesn't mean that we have to have the same relationship as before. Because maybe that relationship is just impossible and unhealthy. So an act of forgiveness does not automatically mean we have to forget the wrong that was done. And it doesn't automatically mean we just have to be in perfect harmony and relationship again. But it does mean that we have to release them from what they owe. Much like Jesus says what God has done with you. Not just once. Not just 7 times. Not even 77 times is enough. Perhaps the offense that you have experienced is more in the range of the millions. And yet Jesus says we're called to forgive anyway. Because violence never works. We've seen that. We've tried that. Since the dawn of humanity, we have been trying to solve our problems by committing acts of violence against other people. And you know what? We're still doing it today. But if violence doesn't work, neither do grudges or legal records of the wrongs received. Jesus says the only thing that solves humanity's problems is radical, abundant, unending, unwavering grace and forgiveness. God has done it for you. Be a good servant and do it for someone else. Let's pray.